We have discriminated against Indigenous children for generations, for decades, for centuries.
Dozens of isolated Indigenous communities in Canada have recently declared states of emergency due to suicide epidemics, unclean water, and a lack of adequate infrastructure. Amid these crises, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a historic visit to Shoal Lake 40, one of the First Nations reserves without clean water and stranded by a broken-down ferry. Trudeau spent several hours with residents here, just one part of an upcoming VICELAND documentary on issues plaguing Indigenous communities. Late in the day, he spoke to Vice News about the government's complex relationship with First Nations and what his new Liberal government says they're doing next. Mr. Trudeau, thank you for joining us. We're here in Shoal Lake 40, and in the recent weeks, the national conversation has turned towards communities like Shoal Lake 40, but also like Attawapiskat and Cross Lake that are enduring and suffering through these crises of youth suicide. And your federal budget has been criticized for underfunding child welfare. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found that our spending in Canada actually discriminates against Indigenous children. So as you've accepted this role as Prime Minister and as you've had this visit today, do you agree with that? Do we discriminate through funding against Indigenous children?
We have discriminated against Indigenous children for generations, for decades, for centuries. And that's why this budget put forward $8.6 billion, never before seen levels of funding for Indigenous communities. And is it enough? No, it's not. And is it going to fix everything overnight? Absolutely not. We have an awful lot of work to do in the coming years, in the coming decades.
For the kids we've met today, I mean, what can they expect, like, for the rest of their teenage years and adult lives? Is it going to be their kids that are going to see these changes, their grandkids? What can be promised?
If their kids are going to do well, it'll be because we helped these kids now who will have a better experience as parents as their parents were able to have, just because so many childhood experiences or parental modeling were stolen in the residential school years. Listening to these kids, I was asking them what they need. One of the girls said, look, we need more counselors. We need more people we can talk to who will understand us. We need more after-school activities so that we have things to do in the afternoons, in the evenings. Not crazy demands, not things that are beyond what any kid in this country should be able to expect. And these are the things we need to work on.
So here in Shoal Lake 40, where we are right now, there's no access to clean water. You yourself were out in the community delivering bottled water, and the last time we spoke, you made a promise to rectify this issue, not just in Shoal Lake 40, but across the country within 5 years. Yeah. Your new budget is committed, I believe, $1.8 billion towards that. Estimates say the whole problem is going to take about $5 billion to fix, with $1.2 billion up front. All these numbers are great to hear, but what can we expect substantially in the next little while? Like, what successes are imminent for this problem?
Investments in infrastructure, investments in actually getting moving on the kinds of things, projects in many cases that communities have had on the books, solutions that they've had there for a long time that there hasn't been funding for. We're going to look at the quick wins we can get to and think long and hard about what we're going to be able to start working on to solve in the coming years.
So it's a strategy stage right now, basically.
Oh, no, there's immediate actions we're going to be able to take this summer in investing in water treatment in facilities that are needed.
Can you share details on where those will be?
We're still working on it. It'd be better to talk to both our infrastructure ministers and Indigenous and Northern Affairs Minister. I mean,
but the money's being spent.
The money's being there. We know that it's time. It's time that the federal government recognize that this simply can't happen anymore. You cannot have as many communities in this country without water. And the irony of Shoal Lake, where the water behind us is where the city of Winnipeg gets its water, and yet this community here doesn't have drinking water. So there are challenges that we have to fix if we want to consider ourselves to be the country that we like to imagine ourselves to be.
And when you are pushed for specifics around Indigenous issues in particular, you say things like the federal government can't do this all itself. And I think you're referring to a nation-to-nation type approach. How do you execute that without being, frankly, like paternalistic? Like, what is the process?
Oh, the process involves consultations. It involves capacity building. I mean, a lot of Indigenous communities have been subject to the Indian Act for so long that they're further from self-governance than we'd like them to be, than they'd like to be. And to get beyond the colonial relic that is the Indian Act is going to take time. Some communities will be able to move off of it within the coming months or years. Many more will take more years, even perhaps decades in some cases, where there's a lot of work to do. But a lot of it is empowering Indigenous communities to develop the capacities to take the lead. But in the meantime, the way we engage needs to be as partners, letting them set the goals, the priorities, and working with them to achieve those priorities and goals.
And to the Indian Act, your Justice Minister compared it to shackles. Mm-hmm. What are the specific parts of that act that you really want to get rid of as soon as possible?
Well, the fact that the federal government controls so completely Indigenous peoples in responsibility, and from when they're born to executing their will. There are things that simply make no sense anymore in a modern and free country, and we need to work very hard with Indigenous communities who are all different, who all have different strengths and challenges and ways of going about it, to build the path forward. So. No, if you asked a community of Indigenous leaders, okay, let's magic wand away the Indian Act tomorrow, they'd say, no,
yeah,
not tomorrow.
Not that simple.
Some of them might be ready next year. Some of them won't be ready for another decade. And it is important for us that we move towards that in a respectful partnership.
You've said in the past that if a First Nation wants to veto a project like a pipeline, the answer would be absolutely that would stand up.
What I've said is that we need to fold in a serious way, the way the Supreme Court has said, consultations. Now, ideally you don't get to a point where consultation is yes or no. You actually involve from the very beginning, like they do in the Arctic, for example. In the Northwest Territories, they have boards that examine the projects from the very beginning with Indigenous voices from the very beginning. So it's not like, okay, here's our project, this is where we want to go, now let's check in with the locals and see how it goes. No, in the very conception of the projects, you have those Indigenous voices folded in, along with other voices. And that approach is where we need to move to.
But does that mean there is not a veto? It's just a sort of a reworking of that consultation process?
You know what? The talk of veto or not veto is actually highlighting the failure of the process as it exists right now. It shouldn't ever even come to that decision of is it a veto or not a veto, because we should be working together from the very beginning. Obviously, no project ever is going to get 100% unanimity, and what level of approval works is something to be worked out going on in an ongoing basis, but in a real and substantive, honest way with integrity, and that's what the Supreme Court highlighted.
This visit has caused a bit of mixed reactions, understandably, and I think a lot of it has to do with Attawapiskat, especially the timing of what's going on there and their outcry to get you to go. Are you going to go?
I look forward to going there. I look forward to getting out right across the country, and it's just a question of when. But the other thing that we need to highlight is that these, whether it was Lalash, where I was just a couple of months ago, or here today, or Attawapiskat, sometime in the future, there are thousands upon thousands of communities like this that shouldn't have to go through a period of emergency to get the kind of attention that communities are getting now. We should be creating solutions that won't require the Prime Minister to drop in a helicopter to show that, no, we're taking this seriously.
Yeah.
We need to be demonstrating that we are
you
acting
could have taken the barge
in
if
every community, to make that difference.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.